perspectives. I work regionally on documenting and mapping traditional place names in Wemindji, and they're working at a more local level, and so we'll do it that way. The program I work for, the Cree Nation Government's Place Names Program, was started in 2013. It was begun as part of an effort to establish a Cree language commission for Wemindji, basically an institution that would be sort of mandated with saving the language. You know, looking ahead, people see a lot of challenges despite a high level of fluency. So the idea was to sort of be proactive and attempt to get ahead of the ball. That project is currently on hold, but the Place Names program was established and is currently located in the CNG's Department of Social and Cultural Development under Willie Eiserhoff. And essentially it's a continuation of the Cree Regional Authority's Place Names, Stories and Lands program, which was a large program in the 1990s. Just to give you a sense of what we're talking about an area of northern Quebec along the shores of James Bay and southern Hudson's Bay that's around 420 plus thousand square kilometers. That's the area covered by, you see the little faint lines there? Those are what are called in English traplines, in Cree and Dohoschi. So the area covered by those traplines is around 420,000 square kilometers, so it's a fairly large territory. There's actually more territory down here for a new community that's been recognized, Washaw-Sibi, plus there's a territory on the Ontario side of the border under claim, plus there's coastal islands. So all in all, we're looking at the size of a large European country, probably larger than Sweden, probably somewhere between Sweden and France. And in terms of our work, we end up working with a variety of entities. We work with community governments. There's 10 community governments. We work in each community, or we haven't as of yet, but we will be. But we also work with what they call entities, and this is just to give you a sense of the lay of the land in case they come up in the discussion. So for example, the Cree Trappers Association, which represents the interests of tallymen, who are the stewards of the traplines. The EMR Planning Commission, which was established as part of a coastal land claim, but which has provisions for the recognition of Cree place names. The Cree School Board, which is responsible for setting the standards around the written language. Also the Quebec Toponymy Commission. So our work sort of involves balancing a number of interests, and it varies in terms of which community. Each community is a bit different how we do the work. When we established the program, we were lucky to sort of inherit 40 years of place name related research. So we have large scale surveys going back to the 1970s. When we began, we began with around 12,000 names. So it's a fairly daunting prospect. The previous surveys varied greatly in terms of the quality of various aspects of the work, right? The quality of the linguistic transcription, the quality of the spatial attribution, the quality of the translation of Cree concepts of what was delineated by a name. For example, the Quebec Toponymy Commission has very specific ideas about geographic entities, which would sometimes sort of mess with what we had. And also, despite having all this work, an awful lot of it, the vast majority of it, never found its way back into Cree communities in ways that Cree people could use. Right, so we had a lot of research, but not necessarily, but that work wasn't accessible necessarily by people in the communities, right? So the goal of this program is not only to work with that data and build on that data, but is to generate ways to get that information back into communities so that the Cree language can continue to be used to describe the land. So in terms of initial challenges, obviously, coming up with a system to work with large data sets involving thousands of names. Coming up with a system to deal with the question of validation. When you have thousands of names, that becomes an issue. The need to work across dialectal boundaries between communities, but still sort of maintain a consistent, morphologically informed approach to writing those names. I mentioned already that there were some issues in terms of the way they were written. In some of the surveys, some of the information may in fact be unusable, and so it's been a real challenge with some of it actually getting to the point where we can understand what was written down. Because you know, it's not like working in a language like English, where there are very sort of a long-standing tradition of literacy and very sort of hard and fast conventions for spelling, right? People write in very different ways, and so some of that was quite problematic. Just to give you a sense of the coverage for those previous surveys. So in the 1970s, the Quebec Toponymy Commission did major surveys along the coast, approximately 4,000 names. Those are the names we're working with in Wemindji, right? And then in the 1990s, the Cree Regional Authority picked up where they left off and began a new round of surveys, right? So you can see that pretty well all the territory has some coverage because they're complementary, with an overlap in Wemindji, which is the northern community. If you look at Wemindji, you see though how different the CRA survey is from the Toponymy Commission survey, right? The density of names is sort of instantly apparent. And one of the things we have to do is we have to go back in, especially to the coastal communities, and do a lot more surveying. And what we found in working in East Main and also in Wemindji is that there's an awful lot of stuff missed in the coastal surveys, right? So a lot of the work now has moved to a phase where we're doing a lot of field surveys and a lot of work in the communities. But getting back for a moment to some of the challenges in terms of dealing with that kind of data, we needed a system that would allow us to correct spellings, to do orthographic standardization, but to do it in a transparent manner so that we're not losing data and so that we're not obscuring the kinds of choices we're making, so that if we are making any systematic mistakes, we'll be able to go back over what we did in a very easy and clear way. People in the future will be able to assess our work in a very clear way. We're not just changing spellings, but we're correcting spellings, but leaving all the original spellings in the database. So you can instantly look at any word in there and say, okay, on what basis was this spelling arrived at? And you can see the field sort of data. And that's important because it would be very easy with data on this scale to just start correcting willy-nilly and end up with a mess and not be able to get back if we are making systematic mistakes. We also opted to go with polygon geometry instead of point data so that we could pay sort of close attention to what the names referred to, right, in terms of geographic extent, right? So if a lake or a section of a lake or a section of a river or an area of land or a portion of a muskeg takes a certain name, we have an indication of that in the database. We're not just left with a point. A lot of the data we had from the previous surveys was just point data, and it's incredibly ambiguous. It's very difficult to work with, and you fast lose sight of what the name, in fact, actually refers to. So a lot of these sort of measures are choices we made to safeguard the accuracy of what we were doing. And then finally, the database also needed to allow for very efficient work with the names themselves, right? So if we arrive at the need to correct a spelling, or if we arrive at a better understanding of the structure of a certain word, we don't want to have to go searching through 12,000, 15,000 entries, trying to find every instance to correct it. We wanted a design that would allow us to sort of efficiently work through that information so that we could be accurate. I mean, the goal of all this is to be able to produce for the communities information that is accurate. And in the context of language degradation and intergenerational sort of language loss, that's important. And then the database needed to be flexible enough to support the production of a variety of different products, right? So we want to be able to produce digital data for people making maps in USG. We wanted to be able to produce physical maps and atlases for the community, stuff people could take into their traplines, into their cabins, and on the land where there's no electricity. We are looking forward to making a website, and then lexicons and dictionaries, because this is also language-related work. And a lot of the vocabulary that's contained in the place names is stuff that's not in the Cree School Board dictionary. It's stuff that's been missed by lexicographers. So, you know, out of the thousands of names we probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of verbal if not maybe even close on 1,000 verbal stems that aren't in the dictionary, right? So there's a purely linguistic side to this as well. It's not just a question of mapping. So for the people who are interested in sort of technology, we opted for a post-GIS open source platform. So despite, you know, what we're doing, the software is free. There's no licensing fees, there's no costs. So that's good. Currently, we have over 9,000 where we've done what we've needed to do, where we have a geographic entity that's linked to a name, and where we have either a morphology that's clear and established, or we have an opaque sort of place name, a place name where the morphology isn't understood, where the word isn't understood even by elders, but where we're sure that the spelling we have matches the pronunciation so that it's accurate, right? And that's sort of where we're at right now. And if you look, we've done a lot of work in Ojibwagamul and in Waswanipi, and you can see, you know, the goal is to get that sort of density over the whole thing. And as we sort of work through trapline by trapline, that's where we hope to get. So it's a sizable project. But this is a screenshot of the database. So when I say polygons, right? You know, if a river or a lake takes a name, then it actually goes in as a polygon. And it's not to pretend that this is issue free, but it does tend to replicate what is collected during the map interviews, right? So if a polygon, if a lake or a feature is actually circled in the, you know, or in a map interview, this system tends to replicate fairly closely what takes place in the map interview. So it's not, you know, there are still obviously going to be issues in terms of representation, but it's better than points for sure. The other challenge that we face, and this is one of the reasons it was included in the mandate of the Language Commission, is that for USG, the official names, the officially recognized place names tend to vary over the territory, but tend to be a mix of mostly badly spelled Cree names, English names, French names. In some areas, some names that aren't spelled so badly. But what that's amounting to in certain areas is a loss of the use of those names by younger land users, right? So if we look at this map, the blue dots on this map are Cree names that are officially recognized, and the red dots are non-Cree names officially recognized. And if you look especially at the southern communities, you know, you look at Waswanipi, you look at Ojibwagamul, you look at large portions of Mistissini, right? The vast majority of official names on those territories are not Cree names. So when people order maps from the government to use on the land, to orient themselves on the land, they're using maps that are covered in English and French. They're not, as that shift to maps is becoming more and more prominent, you're seeing more and more people using French and English names to orient themselves, and they're losing the Cree names, which are much richer in terms of communicating history, ecology, all kinds of sort of important aspects of Cree culture. And so for example, working in Waswanipi and in Ojibwagamul, it's very rare to find younger people who know actually Cree names for their family's territory. They tend to orient themselves almost exclusively in English and French. And even amongst elders, it's surprisingly common to find elders who don't necessarily have a good command of the Cree names for their territory. Okay, cool. That's good. So the goal, you know, like I mentioned earlier, is to try to make products that will be used by people. Not necessarily to sit down and try to cram their heads full of names, but to try to ensure that any products that are needed by people on the land, we can make them with Cree names on them so that they can actually be used, right? So if people need maps, you know, they should be getting maps with, you know, from us with Cree, as opposed to maps from the federal government covered in English and French. That's the ultimate goal of the program. So this is one thing we've started doing, and is trapline maps for families, right? 3 by 4 foot, 1 to 50,000 scale maps, which are, you know, you get a close up there, but which have the Cree names on them, you know, and that is something that people seem quite enthusiastic about. You know, it's you know, so that's, you know, that seems to be something that people like. And will use, right? The response, you know, again, like I said, the goal is not to, you know, the goal is to create the kinds of resources that will allow people to teach each other, you know, in this language with resources, you know, created in this language. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the local presentation.
Thanks, John.
Wajak. In pink, the land is not pink, only the rock surrounding the community. That's just to identify the Wemindji traplines. Combined size, there's 20 traplines altogether. It's about 15,000 square kilometers. That's equivalent to about the state of Hawaii. That's how much land we're talking about. That includes the water, so that's the size. And we have about 1,500 people registered in our community when the community was settled into a permanent location. Our families were hunting and trapping in that area, and because of government pressure to monitor and put people into permanent settlements, we were settled along the coast, where we preferred, but we've moved from that location since. And today there's about 1,400 of us that live permanently in the community. And our traditional knowledge is embedded in that land, and our livelihoods of our people that have lived there for generations, that hunted, trapped, traveled, and raising their families. But today, most of us, I don't know, like maybe about 70 to 90% work at jobs on a permanent basis, year-round basis. And whether it's in the community where you work Monday to Friday for about 48 weeks of the year, or if you're at the mine, you work half of the year but earn the same salary. And you come to the community, and because you miss your family, you end up staying in the community. So it depends on who you are, what your job is. So it is this situation that John also mentioned. The speakers are more reliant on the language, the English language, the use of English terms, where this project in Wemindji originated, and partly in response to that, so that we could have our language, our knowledge, and our culture to be maintained and to be preserved for the long term. So because of all of these conditions that we have to abide by in a contemporary society, we are limited to the amount of time that we could spend on land, and as a result, that takes us away from our traditional knowledge teachers. So it limits our the transmission of our knowledge to our younger generation. So that is the issue at hand. So, sorry, it took so long. Here is a picture of our governance documents. On the left is the vision statement, and the middle is the principles of good government, and the third is the roles and responsibilities of the council. It's spelled out. And then there's the roles and responsibilities of the administrators, like myself. I work for the Cree Nation of Wemindji, and the members' responsibility as members of the community. And within the vision statement, I think I have a quote on the next page. Yes. This is the quote that we took from the vision statement for our project, and it says, "We must ensure the survival of our people, the Youths," and that's what we call ourselves in our language. We must constantly revitalize, respect, practice, maintain, and celebrate our Cree language, culture, and traditions. And when making decisions, we think in terms of the future, our children, and we consider the long-term consequences. And this is the reason for this project. It's the preservation of our people in terms of culture and language. And here are all of the people that are involved in the project. At the top, you have the advisory committee on culture. It's composed of traditional people, elders, some of them roughly my age. They're a little older. We also have the youth involved at the youth center, and also community youth, community services department. This is where I work. And the culture and wellness, I supervise that department as well as the youth. And to some degree, we involved the justice department to aid in our reform programs. Also the chief and council for their support to give us direction as well, and also for funding. The Cree Trappers Association, it's the local branch. What John was talking about was a regional branch, and also the schools in terms of providing tools for them and for the project, and also the tallyman for giving us or imparting their traditional knowledge, so that we can also have their feedback and also give them the information whenever they need that information. And this year we had summer students under a summer employment program. That was their in-kind contribution to the cultural part of the work, the translation, and also the communications department in the community within the band. Our goals is the project is to be done probably, I'd say 95% in Cree in our own language, so that it maintains the language, it preserves the language. The translation is to assist Katherine and Geneviève, who will also be speaking. We will provide booklets and atlases for the school and the material for the school, and to give maps, as I said earlier, to the tallymen whenever they need them. And this is a Wemindji-based project. We will be working at the levels of the family with the trapline, the tallyman and their family, and anyone who wishes to be involved from that family. The information is to be kept and managed and controlled within the community, so that any sensitive information does not leave or get out to companies that are wishing to use that knowledge. There's an intergenerational transfer of that knowledge to our young people, and hopefully get more and more of our young people out on the land. I think I skipped some. Yep.
So I'll skip ahead here. Well, actually, you covered all of it without changing the slides. So we planned for about a year before we actually got to the recording sessions. And in July, we met with a tallyman and his wife. His name is Sinclair and his wife's name is Irene. And we met with them over and over again, and then we started the recording sessions. We had about 6 days of recording sessions that you see in these photos. And once the recording sessions were done, it was all in Cree. Jen marked the maps, and I took what notes I could, and we had the summer students with us to help out too. Summer students then, and our friend Beverly, who worked as a volunteer translator with the summer students, began the sound editing, and that part's not finished yet. We'll go back to working on it when I get back in the fall, but Jen has some examples of what we came up with.
So this summer, we mostly focused on cultural heritage mapping. So it was a way to add to the place names that are already gathered with, so complement that information with recorded stories about skidoo trails, about snowshoe trails, canoe trails, portages, also about lakes, river, rapids, creeks, hills, mountains, for example. So to give you an idea of what we have, there's a previous project back in 2009 that was done by McGill. So all the place names that John was talking about were brought into a mapping platform, and stories that were recorded in 1984 in Wemindji by the community with the tallyman of each Traplines. They were all, so everything was brought into a mapping platform. So the problem with that platform was that it became outdated. So the work that first project that we've done this winter was to bring everything, to update everything, and we chose Google Earth to visualize the stories. So we chose Google Earth because of the user-friendly interface and the durability that the KML format was promising to offer. So here's the territory of Wemindji, with all the place names that were gathered from the 70 studies that John was mentioning. So everything is in Google Earth and complemented with recorded stories. So here's an example.
Esta está scoperta un pezzetto anche. Poi ma che transcena one che sei un altro. Non è sta scoperta. Unita 差不多少些用该去。
A little bit of translation. That was the late Sinclair Stewart. He was asked about that particular lake that's highlighted in that with that arrow. It's called Dog Lake. Someone, when they were traveling in the traditional means by wearing snowshoes in the wintertime, that lake tends to be slushy in the wintertime. And because of them traveling, the slush adhered to the bottom of the snowshoes, and it made it very hard and difficult for them to walk. And he says, I don't know which one of the group member it was. He said, this is a very dog lake, because our I guess our opinions of dogs are a little bit low in the scale of animals. That's why it's called the Dog Lake.
So there are about 80 audio stories on all Wemindji territory that was from this previous project. So this summer we decided to, well, we didn't decide it, but we worked on continuing that work with one trapline in particular. Katherine already started to introduce that project. So this is so this would be the trapline that we were working on, and these are the place names that were already existing. So here are we added 130 more stories to the platform. So this is just some of our challenges, but I think that John already talked about some of the technical challenges that we would be facing at the community level as well, working with database and organizing data that are coming from diverse sources. And like Sammy and Katherine have mentioned, one of the important things in Wemindji that was to have local control and ownership of the information. So one of our challenges is to deal with the different levels of confidentiality. So the information that is owned are accessible only by the tallyman or with the tallyman's family. So that's why we're also working with Google Earth nothing is online for now. So we are working on setting those levels of privacy. One of the requests that comes from the community is to put some layers online, and some layers would be public, such as the safety zones, for example. So we're also dealing with the challenge of accessibility and durability of information, and we have seen in Wemindji with the experience of the previous mapping platform that became outdated. So for this project, we're focusing on making it accessible to the tallyman and the tallyman's family. One other challenge is to respect Cree knowledge and Cree know-how.
Okay. We we had a lot of fun working on this summer. It was really satisfying work because the tallyman and his wife were so enthusiastic about getting the work done. They'd been asking for it since they'd seen that map back in 2008. And they could see then that there'd been a lot of work done on the coast by Colin and Monica, but there was very little for the inland portion. And every one of the points we did this summer has a recording to go with it. So you can listen to a name, hear it said, and hear something about that place. And the quote here is from a student who was listening to a presentation we did in June, and she posted this on Facebook, and the surprise at hearing her grandfather's voice, which she hadn't, her late grandfather's voice, talking about a place just delighted her. So, Sammy, you can conclude.
I guess we're at 0 time. I guess I'll be brief. I forgot to mention that this information that we're working with or working from, it will have big implications within the community. Like it can be used as an educational tool, as we discussed earlier, but it can also be used as a political tool. Once the information has been gathered, let's say if, for example, if there's any negotiations that need to happen in a particular area, we can go to this platform and look at the information and say, okay, there's sensitive information here. What do we do with it? So in that respect, that's how we would address that. So I forgot to mention that earlier. Our people, for as far back as we can remember, we've learned by listening, watching, and doing things alongside our teachers and elders, and we continue this process and to support Wemindji as a community where tradition lives on. That's our community's motto, a community where tradition lives on. So that's the end. There's questions, comments?
Thank you.
See all this data coming to life. I really see that those two projects are quite complementary. I mean, there's more like a rigorous approach from the place names where you have polygons and you define where they are, but it's a bit dry. It's just like the place names. And I don't know if even you have the orality of the place names. And on the other hand, you have more like the more personal, emotional dimension and hearing the stories. But you have points, it's a bit less rigorous, it's a bit more like a mess with the map with all these place names. Did you think about merging those two projects, and is it possible, and how far can you go?
Well, that's sort of, is this on? That's sort of where we're at and what we're looking at, right? And I mean, that contrast between the work is, I think, in large part a contrast between the presentations too, right? I mean, the work that I do is infused with everything that you're talking about on that end every day, right? Talking to people directly, recording stories. It's just in terms of the presentation, we sort of wanted to present what some of the differences working at a regional level as opposed to being in a community all the time, right? Where you have the luxury of sort of being able to work on a more constant basis. But yeah, what we'd like to do, or at least what I'd like to do, I don't know about the people of Wemindji, but is to work on developing a platform that would allow the two to come together, right? So we have a base regionally, and then we have a flexible platform that communities can feed into on top, right? So that there's no duplication of efforts, so that there is complementarity and so that stories gathered, video, pictures, other information could be sort of contributed by different communities, right, on top of that regional base. Because the other thing that didn't really come up is that, we're seeing what's going on in Wemindji, but there's 9 other communities, and most of the communities don't have programs like this. Most of the communities aren't sort of at the place where Wemindji is in terms of doing this work. So with Wemindji, we have an opportunity, if we can build a platform and a program like that, to set an example, to develop methodologies for other communities, to begin sort of enticing other communities into doing that kind of work. There's eagerness, but there's not necessarily means in other communities, right? So that's definitely the next step. I don't know if they have anything to add.
I worked with John when he was in Wemindji. I observed what he was doing and watched the responses. And I know now that if we were to work from his maps in these more extended interviews, that we would have a much richer, I think, experience, because with all the place names already there, we have something to work from. So I see a huge, besides the fact that we could have something that other communities could use, we also have this other way of working together that I think will be really productive in the future.
Anyone else? Yes, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. It's I could relate with what you saw the map I showed, and I think we are before the 2008. You mentioned 2008. I think we are still we are not even there. It's very interesting. 2 questions. One is you've used Google Map or Google Earth. Now, for us, we want to use our map to be a tool that we can superimpose it with the existing maps so that we can use it to negotiate. Have you gotten a way of having the two, such that you could actually, have those names on a normal map? That's the first one. Second one is and I think I'm getting it from what you're saying, that the young people, they are finding it difficult. You use the names that, the real names of those places. They are using names that have been, baptized. Now, have you started, or do you have a strategy of making those names? Because what people associate with is what they see. Names of, the current names of maybe, could be those places, could be schools, could be rivers, all those mountains. There's names that are written somewhere. Is there a strategy of maybe trying to replace them instead of having them on just on the map, on the Google, having it real on the ground, so that people can start, the young people can start relating and, learning? Yeah, those are my 2 questions.
You mean physical signs actually on the ground, so if people are in those places? Yeah, certainly that's something we'll look at, but there are real sort of serious limitations because of the territorial size in doing that, right? So certainly along roads, along highways, efforts to replace currently existing signs, those would all be things that would be, I think, worth pursuing, and things that have been discussed. But most of this territory is quite remote, not easily accessible, and just the sheer sort of scale of size would make a lot of that, I think, pretty difficult, although it, it might be the kind of thing where individual tallymen could be sort of encouraged to do it on their own territories, you know. In terms of the generation of maps for negotiation, that's one thing we want to be able to do, is to provide digital data to anybody being able to make maps, so that they don't have to go through what we're doing, so that if CNG Environment or the Cree Trappers Association or somebody else is making a map, we can give them the names, they can just put it on, boom, label it, bang, and their map, you know, has Cree names for the purpose of whatever they're doing, you know, whether that's negotiation or anything else, you know.
In terms of the second question, Geneviève is going to zoom in on that lake that you see on the right, below right there. Right there, yeah. This lake, as you can see on, can you bring me the pointer? On the right-hand side, you see that line going up and down? Which one? This one here. That's a highway. And pretty much the whole, what you see here is the only modern route that exists there. But our traditional route is a major route right here. And the signs that you're talking about, there's two examples that I could use here. There's one here at this point, and another one here, where I think it was McGill that did that came up with the sign in Roman orthography. On the one on the right is called Upmishkash, the way it's written there, right here, and then the other one Upmiska. That's something that those are the only ones that I know of. And then the other ones are in the community with the stop sign where it says Chipichi. Those are the only time that I've seen traditional terms used out on the land. So it's a possibility that we can do that. In terms of the strategy, using this platform, we thought it would be best for as an education tool in the community without having to go out on the land, because it costs money to go out on the land because it's remote. And a majority of the people traveling today travel on the roads, the modern roads. They don't travel as much on the traditional routes, which is one of the reasons why we want to do the projects. We want to record those traditional routes so that people will know about them. And so people can learn about them in the community. That's why we mentioned mentioned it as an educational tool, not just for the school, but also for the trappers and also for the tallyman for each community, for each trapline, I mean, sorry. So it would be good in that sense. So it helps each families. It's not just one family. In some traplines, there's 2 or 3 families that hunt there, so that they would have access to that information. And I'll leave question number 1 for Geneviève to answer.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add that you about your question to use Google Earth and versus normal maps. We're using Google Earth to visualize the stories related to the place names, but all the points that we gather, and the place names, we're also using maps, topographic maps, to record some of the places, and so we're balancing or always juggling between ArcGIS and Google Earth. So we're using all those tools, yeah, to produce maps as well. We're using topographic base maps over which we layered the place names.
I think we'll have time for just one more. I saw Kat's hand up, and before we head back to Australia, so that we can leave enough time for a bit of a. Okay, there are 3 hands up now.
Mine is really quick.
Sorry?
Mine is really quick.
Yeah, okay.
Mine is really quick.
Go.
I just wanted a point of clarity because from the gentleman that just asked his question, I took his question to mean, for example, the First Nation that I used to work for, Liaxin, their traditional territory is called Baldy's Island, and they want to rename it to Liaxin, which is their traditional name. So I thought that's what his question was about. Is there a strategy of getting your territory back into your traditional language names instead of using whatever the Government of Canada or whoever applied to it?
Yes, that is part of the point of this project, and it's to also make sure that those terms are used out on the land and in the community, and also to be used when we discuss the land, so that it reinforces the language
Part of
and
the
way of thinking.
Part of the challenge in terms of official recognition was a major lake where the Cree name was readopted, the Oshagami on Wemindji territory, and the EU Marine Region Agreement, which was mentioned earlier, sort of negotiated for the official recognition of Cree names on all the coastal islands. The difficulty with official recognition, the big challenge, is one of scale. Right? We're talking about thousands and thousands of names, and the Quebec Toponymy Commission is a very small organization with a very small staff. And so even if they're willing, we'd probably be at it for decades. And, you know, it is something that will have to be pursued, and it is something where we'll have to make priorities in terms of, you know, visibility and importance for renaming. But it would be a significantly long process. And when you factor into that, sort of the map generation cycle by government agencies, even with sort of agreement from the province to officially recognize those names, you might be looking at decades and decades before people in the communities would actually start seeing maps with Cree names on them. And, you know, I don't know what the sort of institutional situation is like in British Columbia, but in Quebec, it would be a long process. And in terms of, you know, it's why not just us, but the Inuit in Nunavik have also adopted the same strategy, where we're just going to produce our own resources because it's much quicker, and we can play that long-term game with the province. But in the meantime, we want to be getting things into people's hands much sooner.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with your approach to this. I just wanted that clarification because that is what I thought I heard his question was, and I wasn't sure I was getting a clear response to his question.
Okay, sorry.
But and that's fine. Regardless, you know, there's 400 or 500 years of history here in Quebec, and so a few decades is really nothing in comparison to the 400 or 500 years of encroachment that has taken place. So, you know, sometimes you just have to be committed, but you absolutely have to get the information now before it gets lost, as was pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to relent and give a moment for Davik and for Andres. Just looking at, in terms of the time, that will leave us 45 minutes for the Torres Strait presentation, in fairness, and then 15 minutes to stretch our legs before the food arrives. So if everybody's okay with that agenda, we just spend more time talking and maybe less time out around the pond.
So just be very quick, it's a comment. The Quebec Toponymy Commission may be a very slow institution, but I'm wondering about Google Earth. The map wizards around the table know this better than I, but I mean, what do they care where they're getting their register and rosters of place names, whether it's from you guys or from the Quebec Toponymy Commission?
That's a good question. I don't know whether you could supersede the sort of officially recognized names that easily with Google Earth, but it would be something to try, you know, for sure.
Okay, they couldn't hear you, I think, but maybe the mic just a bit closer. Okay, but was that, did the translators hear that? Yeah? Okay, yeah, sorry. It was okay. Andrés.
Sí, es una curiosidad, nomás quisiera saber que hicieron un trabajo enorme, ¿verdad? Quisiera saber si estos puntos que hicieron, si todo lo que están ahí están titulados
I'd like to
en
know
nombre de la comunidad.
if all these names are registered on behalf of the community or the territories where there is a sampling of these areas. Do they have ownership of these names? We did some work, we had some problems. Well, we tried to recover our territory, and suddenly our land belonged to the farmers, and we lost access to this territory. So I'd like to know, you sold, if you surrendered title, or who does this title belong to?
Legally, I don't think I'm the person to answer surrender. Because I'm Cree. I don't think I surrendered, or I don't think my ancestors surrendered anything except for what was flooded, what was damaged. That's how it was explained to me. Any and all that is not affected was not surrendered. So in that sense, there is a contention with the what Canada or Quebec would argue. They would argue that we surrendered any and all lands in the Cree territory. What we didn't mention here is the legal land regime that exists in this area. We're more focused on the traditional information, traditional knowledge. That belongs to us, not as individuals, but as a community, as a communal society. And that records everything. But we recorded, well, not everything, but as much as we could. Of course, because it's an oral society, we've lost some knowledge due to time or disuse. And our stories do go back to the Ice Age. Some of them do mention megafauna that are estimated to be around, 8 to 12,000 years, maybe longer. So those are the kinds of things that we would like to come out from our knowledge keepers so that we could use that information on these maps that become everyday knowledge. For example, there's another area that I could have used where it's further east from this lake that you see here, and it talks about a giant that wanted to kill our people. And he did kill some of them, and the lone survivor left left the area to go find other people, and then they came back and they used their spiritual knowledge to connect with the land to locate the giant, and they pursued him, and they were able to kill him. And the hill is called, in English, rough literal translation is pile of giant. It's called, in Cree, it's called Edushapskubit, because when they killed him, they cut him up and piled the body. And it literally looks like pieces of meat that was piled on top of each other. And to the south of the pile is another hill, and they call it the giant's pot that sits upside down. And an elder that lives in the area said he actually went to the little hill and walked around it and saw an opening. And he said he crawled in with a flashlight in the middle of the day, and sure enough, it looks like a pot on the inside. So this is an example of the knowledge that we try and retain to make sure that our presence on this land goes far, far back in terms of political purposes.
Thanks. Yeah. If I could add a suitable metaphor for decolonization, the slaying of the cannibal giant and the piling up of his parts. And as Sammy alluded to, it's actually legally a quite complex situation. There are 3 different categories of land, some of it under something like ownership, but a minority, and the remainder various rights that are spelled out in the agreement, the treaty that was signed in 1975. But there have been a whole series of subsequent treaties in which the Crees politically have proceeded on the premise that they have not surrendered title, that they've not surrendered anything, really, in that James Bay and Northern Quebec agreement. They've accepted flooding, yes, but it is a continuing struggle, and part of the importance of the cultural landscape politically is part of reclaiming the entirety of Inuit, the whole of their territory. Also, parts that have not had ownership rights accepted by the governments, there have been very substantial governmental rights that the Crees have achieved through subsequent agreements. It was a very complex game that we don't have really time to enlarge on at this point, but may come up in discussion as we go forward. So let me turn to the Torres Strait group, I guess that this will be Monica Mulrennan from Concordia University, Annick Thomassin, doctoral candidate at McGill, who's also been affiliated with the Australian National University and has worked with John Altman, Mino Mosby, who is a Torres Strait Islander from an absolutely beautiful place in central Torres Strait, a large sand cay called Masig. Annick's partner, incidentally. And this is an area which has gorgeous fringing coral reef and a seascape, a very extended seascape of coral reefs. It's also really at the center of a long history of colonial commercial fisheries and some of the very important struggles that Torres Strait Islanders have been involved in. We had invited and he had accepted Kenny Bedford, who's from a neighboring island that Monica and I have both worked on, Erub. Kenny's a member of the Torres Strait Regional Authority, which is the regional governmental body of the Torres Strait Islanders, self-governmental body. We lost him actually to the election process. He was successfully elected or re-elected to the board, but they then immediately called a meeting which conflicted with our meeting, and so Kenny reluctantly had to cancel. But he sends his greetings and best wishes for our meeting, and we're very fortunate to have Mino present to hold up the Torres Strait Islander participation at this event. So let me turn it over to, I'm not sure who's speaking first, Mino?
Thank you. Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Wemindji people for their hospitality, and also CICADA for inviting the Torres Strait representatives. For those of you who don't know, so Torres Strait is another group of Indigenous Australians. Thanks to, and it's in the Northern Passage. Okay. So on the map on the bottom right, that's Torres Strait is right in the middle of Australia and PNG. Yes, it's an area of 35,000 square kilometers, which consists of 5 groups, which is the Eastern Torres Strait, the Top Western, the Western, Inner Western, and the Central Island groups. In the Eastern Island groups, so coming back to John Altman's terra nullius status on, from the Australian government, the first case, the native title case that was won, it was by Eddie Mabo, and he's from the eastern parts, island. So that was a good gateway, and there's been a lot of successful native title claims. Yes. Okay. In the Torres Strait, yeah, it consists of a diverse ecosystems. So in the west, it's mostly mangrove and seagrass bed, and then yeah, it's in the Central Islands, it's mostly Coral Cay Islands, and to the east, it's volcanic as well. So there's a lot of like cultural trade movements through the Torres Strait. So if we would want something, some species of fish that we want from the west, there would be some sort of trading between the islands. And for commercial species, it's there's a lot of commercial species, rock lobsters, trochus shells, and sea cucumber and fish stocks. I wish that Kenny Bedford was here as well, and I'm sure he would have a lot more to say. And yeah, but that's just an introduction of Torres Strait, and I'll pass it to Annick.
Thanks, Mino. I'd like also to thank the Huron One, that people who have kindly welcomed us here today. So I'll just keep. So there's some. Okay, it's very weird, the color on this. Some of the ecosystem Mino was talking about. Some crayfish. I'm a bit hungry now. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is kind of based on a part of my PhD dissertation. My PhD dissertation as a whole focus on the politics of co-management of fisheries in the Torres Strait, and basically, in short, I'm trying to see if the co-management structure would lead as much bureaucratize the islanders as much as an islanderization of the bureaucracy. I'm not going to cover my whole thesis here, so I'll just cover very simply one aspect of it. The Torres Strait management of the marine resources, it's managed by the Torres Strait Protected Zone Joint Authority. The Torres Strait Protected Zone Joint Authority was put in place in 1984 via the Torres Strait Treaty. The Torres Strait Treaty is not necessarily a treaty between Torres Strait Islander and Australia. It was with the independence of Papua New Guinea. And it's a treaty basically between Papua New Guinea and Australia. That kind of translates in the map used by the PZJ, where we can't see any of the island, of the island names. And like it's York, for example, is Masig. We can't see islander marine territories either. Like we only see the fisheries lines and all the jurisdictions that matters for Australia and Papua New Guinea relationship, basically. So the Torres Strait Treaty, gave to the PZJ the mandate, one of the first mandate, and often said as being the most important. As it's been said earlier, we can hold them accountable. I think I have the source here. It's a little bit small, but so the main purpose of the Protected Zone Joint Authority is supposedly to protect, acknowledge and protect the traditional way of life and livelihood of the traditional inhabitant of the Torres Strait region. Yeah, the Protected Zone Joint Authority. Where is that? So it's made of basically, it was for a long time, from 1984 to 2002, it was more or less a classic top-down structure, but from 2002, the Torres Strait Regional Authority was included to the board. The line on the Protected Zone Joint Authority is the decision board of the authority. So it's, but the Commonwealth, the federal Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries has a veto rights on any decision that is made in the Torres Strait. So, and the Torres Strait Regional Authority is the only Torres Strait body that has decision making in the process. Torres Strait Islanders are, as advisory members, are present in most of the other structure, with part of the consultative structure under that. So one of, so I said that the main purpose of the Protected Zone Joint Authority was to protect islanders' traditional way of life and livelihood, but they also have the mandate to preserve and manage the marine environment, and most importantly, to facilitate and promote the optimal sustainable use of the resource of the Torres Strait. So that looks all very good, but these mandates are very contradictory, and one way to look at it is, well, in the Torres Strait Treaty or the PZJ papers, the idea of traditional way of life or livelihood is not very well defined, which can be quite convenient, I suppose. So what I did in my thesis is that I look at the case of Masig Island, which is where mine was from, and it's right there. Oh, gosh. Here in the middle. So I was trying to see what was done in terms of management, but also in terms of fisheries on that particular island, to have a sense of what it is, what that traditional way of life is. So Masig is a small sand cay in the middle of the Torres Strait. It's about 165 square kilometer and 3 meters above sea level. So question of climate change are quite important in that area. What else? So yeah, the Masig territory is more water than land. It includes 12 islands. It's in the darker part here. And the territory, the marine territory that is part of the customary marine tenure is about 1,580 square kilometers. So it's about 950 times bigger than the land territory. So Masig, well, I just have the names of the islands, but you have to understand that the sea is also covered with names. Masig Islanders are involved in the small boat fisheries. So I'm just showing kind of a few ideas of so that's more traditional subsistence type of fishing with nets or hand lines. There's also spearing, and it can also be done from small boats, about 5 meters inland. The commercial fishing also happen on these small boats. And commercial fishing and what is considered traditional fishing or subsistence fishing happen at the same time. It's quite an artificial category of management, basically. For the islanders, often they would go out at sea. If they go for trucker shell or for tropical rock lobster, they go out. They might catch a few fish on their way back home to put on the table. Even like crayfish are interesting species. They are both commercial and subsistence at the same time, coming back with if you sell it for the cray tail, the tail will be cut. The head will be kept for someone in the family. It's quite, and also it's a multi-species fisheries where people would kind of work with the tide, starting with collecting a few trocker shell, for example. Then when the tides rise, they would go to catch a few cray and stuff like that. Massig Islanders fish within the territory I've shown earlier. So within both the darker zone, and I have another map, I forgot to put that one, but that go quite far below what you see here. The kind of paler zone is a zone shared with the community of Poruma, for example, and Erub on the other side. So Massig Islanders, that fishery is involved in a broader economic system that doesn't exist in itself. So it's part of what John Altman has created a model he called the hybrid economy. So I'm just gonna jump to that slide. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you like the scale between the kind of more industrial fleet of non-islander fishing. That's for the prawn industry. It makes the island look quite like a industrial zone sometimes. So yeah, the hybrid economy is a combination and articulation of participation in the state, customary and market sector of the economy, and most of the economic activity happen at the intersections of this. For example, there was a program called this Community Employment, CDP, Community Development Employment Program that was kind of a form of minimum income. Some were qualifying it like work for the dole, but it's not quite adequate. For the people involved in that program, that would give them pay for work that they would do on a part-time basis, so a few hours a week. And the island managers had organized it so they can have 1 week on, 1 week off, so that allows people to be able to go fishing when the time is good. So they would have this kind of, so the people who would be on that program would have that kind of income that they would say, this is for the rent, and fishing is for the rest. So they would go fishing when they needed an extra income, when they wanted to send their kids to school, buy a new fridge, a car. There's also like the customary sector, which is like anything that has to do with subsistence fishing, and anything that goes for the celebrations and ceremonies. And the market sector, the fisheries were represented there, but there was there was not a lot of economic activity on the island, but that could have been working for the store, the two stores that are on the island, or one of the, like Ergon Energy, who was the electricity company that was on the island. So most of the people had horizontal careers, so they were combining work both in the fisheries as well, paid fisheries or customary fisheries, while working for the school, for example, and sometimes receiving salary from CDP. So that system was, like now the island has lost the CDP, and I'm not quite sure what system is in place at the moment, but that allowed them to like play a little bit when market fall and the price is not good. They could focus more on work on the land, and then when the price is good, go back in the sea. If the weather is bad for a long period of time, that ensure that they have a basic salary as well. So, and one thing that I think is important to say about this is that it was really not a new thing. There was some kind of a state system in place from the early 1900s. And when it was a scheme that helped Torres Strait Islander to buy pearl loggers when the pearl industry was still functioning. And so they can become owners, operator in the fishery. And when they would work very hard for a long period of time, and then when they would have bought off their boat, they would then like slow down and then start using their boat for traveling, for customary fishing, for engaging in diverse fisheries, but like using it really in a way that corresponded to their way of life. They have on the island, there's different perspective on what level of fisheries is desirable, but they have this principle that they call take only what you need. And so like, while some would like to see like more like bigger boat fisheries like starting off, which is not the majority of people, but like some do. But in spite of this, they don't see it as like fishing up to quotas or to a maximum. It's always like based on certain aspirations and also like, with the idea that excessive accumulation of wealth is really not something that is valued in the community in general. So I was like linking that hybrid economy to some kind of an expression of islanders' aspiration and a lived kind of expression of their life projects. So I'll try to do very quickly. So basically, if you like, these were like choices made by people, not only a reaction to a lack of opportunities on the ground. It's so when we go back at the protected zone joint authority management level, we can see, because the focus is so much on optimal utilization of resource, they see islanders as being under fisher, basically. That in other cases could be understood as conservation, but in this case is considered as underfishing, as a lack of use of, well, it's a waste of potential, basically. So like that principle that is pushed forward by the PZJ, it come into conflict with the take only what you need or more need-based way that islanders, well, their way of life, basically. There's also little scope in the protected zone joint authority for, well, it's really not based on a recognition of the ownership of the sea. In 2013, the sea claim, a sea claim was won in the Torres Strait after about 12 years, I think. And so, like, despite of that, like, it's still the state, basically, that decide on allocation of resource, and islanders haven't gained enormous control over the resource. There's a case, for example, when there's been a buyback of the finfish fisheries in 2008, and they now have 100% of the total available catch. But in spite of that, islanders are called to lease back the quota as much as they can, so they can basically build up, in the meantime, build up their effort in the fishery. So, yeah. Yes, I'm finished now. So basically, there's a real clash. Well, if the protection of the traditional way of life is really important, you wonder why they don't start to look at and trying to understand that way of life and start basically putting an effort in and helping the model, islanders to gain control over their resource, but also like support their economic system. So I'm just going to give it to Monica. Sorry, I've taken too long. It's all yours now. I'll just skip a few.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be the final speaker of a long day, but anyway, here goes. What I want to do is really cover just some ongoing research in Torres Strait that I think connects with the CICADA agenda. And I want to begin with some of the work Colin and I have been involved in Airub. Airub is in the eastern Torres Strait, and it's where Kenny's from, Kenny Bedford, who wasn't able to be here. Just got about half a dozen projects that I'll take you through very, very quickly. The first really relates to figure out which way to okay.
The green one. Not the green one. Top one.
The other green one. The big green one.
I think it's.
Is
it possible to reload it? I think this one probably cancelled.
Maybe that one. It's done. Thank you. Okay, so I want to just refer briefly to some of the work Colin and I have been involved in over the last 20 years, documenting land and sea claim, the territories of Airub. Colin's been involved in more extensive areas and beyond Airub, but some of that work, and you can see from, well, actually this is a close-up of Airub, which, similar to Masig, the sea territory is far more significant than the land territory. The work we've been involved in doing involved the mapping of place names, boundaries, stories, and other connections, land and sea management and use, also documenting Debe Toner, which is the system of rules for regulating, for respecting and sharing land and sea territories. And that work has been contributed directly to the native title determination. Airub achieved native title recognition of the land in 2005, and then the more recent sea claim gave recognition in 2010. So there's that work, and you see here some of the different aspects of that particular customary marine tenure system. So the focus of that project has been making Indigenous sea space visible. John mentioned this morning how there's some recovery of Indigenous title across Australia, but when it comes to sea territory, it has been much more challenging. So making Indigenous sea space visible is something we've been focusing on. Another project, one that I've been involved in, has been working with women on Airub to document and recover their narratives, knowledge, experience, and lived territories. So some of that work has been interesting because it kind of challenges a lot of the perspectives of existing literature. It certainly indicates that women and their fishing activities, that they are the most consistent group of fishers. This work is based on survey data as well as interviews I've conducted with many of the women on Airub. Fishing is a very reliable source of protein. Women are harvesting a greater diversity of species than is acknowledged in the literature. They apply a much more diverse range of technologies than is acknowledged and access an increasing range of fishing locations. Based on that research, it seems that 88% fish at least once a week, 48% 43% fishing most days or every day. And really interesting is the fact that over 50% are fishing for commercial purposes. And if you look at the fishing records, they are invisible because women, when they submit their fish to the freezer, it's under the head of household, so that wouldn't, it's only through interviews that that becomes apparent, the significance of their fishing. A very detailed source of knowledge. Knowledge is gendered, and that it's so important then to tap that. And also various taboos, ritual, and superstition surrounding their involvement in fishing and indeed their activities more broadly on the sea. And a range of motivations are clearly apparent for women fishing. There is tying with Annick's work, this idea, the hybrid economy. Certainly, fishing is a very important supplementary source of supplementary income, but it also fulfills very important kinship obligations. It's an important space for women for friendship, for yarning, so chatting, gossiping, humor, self-reflection, a site of creativity and power as well. And I've quoted there from Nora, the lady that you see there in the photo. Saltwater, he, like our blood, he runs through our veins, really emphasizing the significance of that attachment to the sea. And really just to capture the real outcomes of that work, that the sea is more than a place where people fish, where women fish. It's more than a fishing place. It's a learning place, a social place, a healing place, a spiritual place, a a memory place, and most of all, a home place. So some other work that we've been involved in relates to work that Colin and I have done since, I guess, the late 1990s, focusing really on discourses and really the disconnect between discourses of federal, state fisheries managers and islander fisher hunters. And this work has been extended beautifully by Annick in her work in Masig, and a doctoral student of mine, Annie Lalancette, who's worked in Yam and Badu, and Annie is defending her PhD next month. And her work has really focused on the values and motivations, islander values and motivations, and how they're at odds with the imperative of optimal utilization and quota management in the Torres Strait. So I think our combined work on the role of fisheries means that we have insights into regional differences in the articulation of the hybrid economy, and as Annick has said, the different expressions of individual and collective life projects. So just wanted to highlight that. Another project, and this is the second last slide, I think, so we're getting there, is a marine strategy, these conservation documents, and the one on the right, my initial involvement in the Torres Strait back in 1992 was I was coordinator of the first marine strategy, and there have been several iterations of a marine conservation strategy in the Torres Strait. The most recent one released a couple of weeks ago, this land and sea management strategy for Torres Strait, 2016 to 2030, 36. And you know, I think that these vision statements, and I actually just threw in the Cree conservation strategy because we are increasingly seeing these statements coming out. And I think it's interesting for us, and perhaps for those of us in CICADA, to look at these vision statements of environmental protection and to consider the extent to which they address global, national discourses of environmental protection and economic development, how local visions and aspirations are framed in relation to those discourses, how they interface with local and regional legal and jurisdictional arrangements, and indeed how these documents are used or perhaps not used to leverage support and advance local agendas. So I think some interesting work could be done there, and particularly in Torres Strait, because we have involvement, and we've got like almost 30 years of involvement in these processes. And a final project that I want to make reference to, but one that we'll take up tomorrow when Jose and Thora and I speak on Axis 5, is I think the attention given to land and sea in Australia and in Torres Strait particular is significant. I think that we have seen over several of the meetings that the CICADA group has had, the attention that groups like the CICADA, like Cree, that continuum between land and sea, the importance of the interface between land and sea, that is so often forgot. There's a real silence around land and sea. That is important and absolutely integral to how many Indigenous peoples think about their territory, land and sea as a continuum. And I think some of the impediments that are in place in many jurisdictions, I think, are being overcome, or at least being thought about in interesting ways in Australia. So I think there's some kind of, it's instructive to consider the Torres Strait and to consider the broader Australian context in relation to this issue of land and sea, that interface. So we'll look at that more tomorrow, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Esso.
Well, let's give 5 minutes to questions or comments. Nico.
Thanks for great presentations. I'm a bit of a stickler here, so I have a question with your definition of hybrid economies. Can you please tell me what is your definition of hybrid economies? Because I don't fully get it. And I've been working on what I call mixed economies. And I would like to hear what are your views so I can try to challenge or agree.
Well, well, like, yeah, I should throw that to you, John. No, so in the context of that was developed, like I'm basing my, the definition I'm taking from John's work on, so basically it was like looking at how, it was to kind of acknowledge that the customary sector was often overlooked when the government or like others would look at indigenous relationship with their land or like their economy. So it was to bring back the importance of the customary sector. And I think well, it shows that it's like, there was one thing, I know that it's quite a difficult concept because it can lead to different interpretation. There was, for example, like some researchers that wrote that in the Torres Strait, they were still relying on a hybrid economy and kind of implying that it was something that was between traditional economies and on the way to some kind of fully fledged capitalist economy. I think in this case, I would see that more as, I think it was Francis and Howard Murphy in Australia that says relational autonomy. So it's basically like indigenous people choosing to articulate all these sectors based on their own needs and values instead of like totally assimilating to the proposed market economy and the systems that the kind of multiple succession of government have proposed, adopting like a more neoliberalist kind of trajectory. So it's basically a system where like, yeah, you just like have, like there was an example, for example, like with the crayfishing, you could go crayfishing, your boat might have been bought through like, well, like, yeah, through CDP, like money that you accumulated with time from government payments, and then you're basically taking that boat to go fishing. That brings you like some commercial, well, you sell the crayfish and then you come back and you get some part of it in the customary system. And it can be considered as, like, you can look at it on an individual base, I think, but also as a community, on a community base as well. But I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah.
Maybe since it's become a three-way conversation by reference to John's work.
Sorry.
Do you want to try to answer Nico's question before Nico responds? Is that
Sure,
okay?
I'd be happy to, Nico. Also should send you a lot of material on the notion of economic hybridity.
Yeah.
But basically, economic hybridity refers to actually existing economies in Indigenous communities where you have a mix of the market or private sector and the state or the public sector, and hegemonic thinking about these economies ignores the fact that you have the customary or the non-market sector. So it basically looks to understand the working of the economy as a interaction between these three sectors without ignoring, you know, the fundamental role of the it used to be thought of as the pre-colonial economy, but it's a pre-colonial economy that's actually in the present. And it influences how people engage with the market and with the state, but it also is, which is why we use the Venn diagrams, but it's a very crude abstraction, but it shows how these three things interact constantly. And where you have much of the most productive work is where you get the three sectors intersecting. It's an economy that draws upon Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous technology, Indigenous norms in resource utilisation, at the same time as it interacts with market mechanisms and state regulation and state support of economic activity.
Sorry, just a quick rebuttal here. Can you give me an example of a pure economy? Because I can only see hybrid economies, even in the our current economy, under your definition, and I think, and I agree with that definition, I would consider that our economy is a hybrid economy. Because most of our labor in households don't pertain to a market economy nor to a private sector.
No, I agree with you entirely. I think the hybrid economy is everywhere, but in
the only economy.
Yeah, but in the Indigenous realm, I think that the customary can be more significant in terms of livelihood than it might be. But of course, we've got the reproduction of labour, we've got the work within the domestic realm. So I would argue that the hybrid economy is everywhere, and sensible notions of actually existing economies must take into account, the nature of work that's not valued by the market, but adds to market value. Yeah. Now the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You weren't going to let me away with that.
I was just going to really, look, I wanted to just maybe draw some comment from maybe the three of you on two issues. One is the iconic species, marine turtle and dugong, that you didn't say much about, but it's something that focuses a lot of attention in Australia on the Torres Strait, sometimes quite unjustly. with this view that it's the hunting of Torres Strait Islanders that affects the sustainability of these species. So I wondered whether you'd like to comment on that. And similarly, you mentioned the native title sea claim, but you didn't mention the Akiba decision in the High Court,
I just didn't know
which,
the name. Oh,
which gives Torres Strait Islanders now non-exclusive commercial rights in species. So going back to the turtle and dugong, does Akiba allow Torres Strait Islanders to now trade in marine turtle and dugong?
Who wants to start? Well, first, no.
Why not?
Well, I don't know. You know what like me is complicated. No, well, I don't know. And first, the sea claims I mentioned was Akiba, but yeah, it didn't change anything in terms of islanders, despite the right to fish for any purposes, as it's stated in the findings. They still need to buy license from the government to do commercial fishing. So, and I think the argument about the turtle and dugong one is because of the international kind of conventions and obligation of Australia for the protection of marine species. I don't think it will ever change unless, I don't. Akiba hasn't changed as far as I understand it.
There's though also a bit of slippage with the law. Always potential, sometimes not actuated. I mean, one answer to your, to that question about whether people have commercial rights to deal commercially in turtle and dugong, in principle, yes. But until somebody gets arrested and Torres Strait Islanders decide to have a well-formulated case that focuses on that issue, go all the way to the Supreme Court, or to the High Court of Australia, the status quo will remain that, no, it's not okay to hunt turtle. And, but that case, even that element of the case was won effectively on green turtle and other shell that was clearly, demonstrably being traded before sovereignty could reasonably be argued to have been imposed on Torres Strait Islanders by the British.
I would just add, John, as well, that certainly in the eastern Torres Strait, the focus is on being able to sustain a healthy population of turtle. Obviously, dugong isn't as significant in the eastern Torres Strait, but just for ceremonial and food process purposes, concerns about the ongoing availability, quite apart from any commercial value, particularly in the context of climate change, the warming of those waters. So a lot of interest in conservation and less being expressed, at least in my interviews, about the commercial component.
I guess just to follow up very quickly, the reason I raise this is clearly, cases that go to the High Court like Akiba open up potentiality for Torres Strait Islanders to seek compensation for loss of species like marine turtle and dugong, because the science tells us that their hunting accounts for very little of the loss of sustainability of these species, because there's all these other impacts that occur that I'm sure you're well aware of. And so I think that these test cases that go to the High Court really open up potentiality for Torres Strait Islanders to take control of everything that goes on in the Torres Strait. In a legal sense, I take on board what you say, Colin, that the actual practice, can be quite difficult. But I think what's really important also is that we might start, having some much more transparent discourse around what is it that's impacting on these species, and how much of the impact is in fact to do with Torres Strait utilisation as distinct to all these other impacts that we're seeing, including, of course, climate change?
I guess now we're at 10 to 6, so that's going to leave us 10 minutes to stretch our legs. And I want to, well, first to thank this panel or this group, and with a round of applause. And secondly, to remind us that we are reconvening at 8 o'clock for what will be a fascinating presentation and some viewing, I think, of some product of the Power of the Lens project, which involves Atikamekw partners, together with Ariella Odovac and Thora Herman, Katherine Potvin, who referred to this project earlier. So we've got time for a leisurely dinner, but let's be back at 8 o'clock.